South Carolina State Representative Nancy Mace is officially the GOP nominee for the 1st Congressional District. I talk one-on-one with Nancy for the special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Nancy Mace, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Hey, thank you for having me on today, Quintin.
I appreciate it greatly. And first and foremost, congratulations on being the 1st Congressional District GOP nominee.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And let me jump right into it because obviously you had your victory party over in Mount Pleasant, Saltwater Cowboys last night. And you said this quote, "Today is a great day for a lot of reasons. For every independent thinker in the Low Country, it's a day one of our new mission, to unite together to take back the Low Country." How do you do that right now?
Well, last night we won by over 30 points, and so it was a resounding victory for us in a Republican primary, and surprised, maybe even shocked a few people on how well that we did do last night. It was very exciting, and it's very humbling to be able to bring that many people together because we had a record number of people voting in the Republican primary yesterday, over 80,000 people, and I really want to unite Republicans, independents, and maybe even a few Democrats together in the general election to win this seat. That's really important to me.
And you also said this too. I insisted on running a positive campaign about the voters and their issues and why I was the best candidate to represent them. I'm proud to say we did it. My Democratic opponent votes with Nancy Pelosi 85% of the time. This is not what most of the Low Country believes or deserves. But then, how many times have you voted with Governor McMaster?
Oh, I have no idea. You'll have to look at my voting record, which I'm sure will come up during the election cycle. But I certainly support the governor on, for instance, he's opposed offshore drilling.
Right.
And the reason that we don't have offshore drilling and why South Carolina has essentially prohibited is because of the work that's been done at the state level, in large part to the governor's leadership on those issues. I mean, every year, for example, the state in its budget prohibits inland infrastructure for being built, which effectively bans and prohibits offshore drilling along our coast. And so he's done a lot of good works for the Low Country and is with us on conservation issues. And I think that's a great thing.
What does the Low Country believe and deserves right now, Nancy?
Right now, jobs in the economy are number one. And Quintin, you know this pre-COVID-19, our unemployment here was 1.86%. We had a great economy. And, looking past COVID-19 and our economic future, we've really got to be focused on jobs. We've got to be focused on small businesses because they really are the backbone of our economy. We've got to come up with tax policy that helps those small businesses. So you grew up here. So right after Hurricane Hugo, for instance, the IRS did a revenue procedure that would allow small businesses to write off their losses from the hurricane that fiscal year, as opposed to waiting till next year when they do their taxes, because a lot of these businesses are out of money. And now with some of the riots that have happened too, some businesses have been further physically destroyed, not just from a health and safety standpoint. And so we've really got to find ways that we can get back. I think healthcare policy is important to voters in the Low Country, and certainly also conservation efforts. I have a 98% rating with the conservation voters of South Carolina. Joe and I are both supporters of the environment and conservationists, and those values are important to voters in the Low Country.
Let me go back to the last part of what you said last night. The fight to end Nancy Pelosi's hold on our district starts tonight. Why didn't that fight started 2 years ago when Congressman Cunningham got into office?
What do you mean?
Why didn't that fight start then?
Well, because there wasn't an election cycle. So the seat you run every 2 years for the U.S. Congress, for the U.S. House of Representatives. And 2 years ago, I was a state lawmaker, not even thinking about running for Congress. And so in session and everything. But, when he first got elected, didn't have a record. And he ran saying that he would be Low Country over party, yet since he's been elected, it's really been party over Low Country. And so, we've had Tim Scott and Mark Sanford. We've had a real independent streak, and they've gone against their own party many, many times in their leadership and their tenures in Congress. And so I think that the people in the Low Country, they don't want someone who's just going to go along with their party. Most of the time, vast majority of the time, 85, 95% of the time, they want someone who is going to stand up for the issues that matter to us. And you know me, I have a record of standing up when it's important, and even standing up against members of my own party. So for instance, when I felt like Republicans spent too much in the budget, I voted against it. And I've been very vocal about those issues. And that's why I think I'm the right person for the 1st Congressional District.
And let me go back to last night. Obviously, there's no runoff. You won by 30 points. What does those 30 points tell you, Nancy?
It's great momentum going into the general election. To be able to avoid a costly runoff is important because you can save some money and start fundraising immediately for the general election. This is one of the top seats in the country, and there's going to be a lot of money that has to be raised if I'm going to be serious about winning it. And so, it's going to take a lot of work, but, to be able to win that with that kind of strength going into the general election just gives us a lot of momentum and excitement. I'm excited about it, and our supporters are as well. And it's just, it's humbling too, very humbling. We had hundreds of people come out and volunteer, and now we've got to multiply that in order to win in November.
Since last night, how much money have you fundraised?
We're still working on it. I spent some time with my kids this morning. It's important to take a little bit of a break, and I hung out with my children today. But we're still raising money. I mean, we've raised a lot of money overnight once we announced that we had won without a runoff, and have been fundraising throughout the day. So.
And you told Kelly Golden this morning on WSC that you have to look at the details as far as the numbers. Mm-hmm. What exactly details are you looking at right now?
Oh, every candidate that wins an election wants to know what precincts they won, what precincts they lost, their strongest county, where that was. And so having a better understanding of that, how voter turnout was. I was really surprised that voter turnout was above 80,000. I really wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a lower voter turnout because of absentee voting, because of COVID-19. And then it was supposed to rain on election day, and it did not for most of the day. It stayed sunny and clear. All those things factor into it. And I was really surprised by the high turnout, but I think that people are they're concerned about their country. They're concerned about their jobs and the economy and those sorts of issues. And so I think that bodes well for us looking at November. The turnout was that high in the primary. It's even going to be even greater. It'll break records from 2018 is what that tells me.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
What was your strongest county last night?
Probably my home county in Berkeley. I haven't looked at the voter yet, but if I had to guess, that would be because I live in Berkeley County, that would logically be the best, but I haven't looked at it. So.
And you talked earlier about the economy. How will you help Congress to keep the Trump cuts permanent if elected?
To get the what?
The Trump cuts, keep it permanent.
The tax cuts?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I support the President's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the first round of tax cuts. When you talk to business owners, especially small business owners, those tax cuts mean jobs because they then reinvest the money that they got back in those tax cuts into their employees, into job training. And so pre-COVID, we had 1.86% unemployment. And I would talk to many small business owners, especially in our food and bev industry. And for many of those people, minimum wage wasn't $8 an hour. It was $15 to $20 an hour because the economy has been so good here. When those tax cuts happened, it allowed them to reinvest in their employees, create more businesses, pay their employees better, create jobs. And so I would also support a second round of tax cuts if they were to come through Congress.
And how will you empower the free market as a congresswoman?
Yeah, well, I believe in the free market and competition, and especially, it's across the industry, but for example, if we're talking about healthcare, and I've really led an effort here in the state of South Carolina to repeal regulations in the healthcare system, and to have, if you have more competition in any industry, but in healthcare, for example, I believe that prices will go down for consumers and for patients, and then access to healthcare, both in rural and metropolitan areas, access and quality of care goes up. And in education too, if you have school choice, parents who only have one choice really have no choices, but children who are stuck in failing schools should be able to have the opportunity to go to better schools. And that's why I support competition in our educational space, for instance. But there are lots of ways that the free market can generate jobs and revenue, opportunity, and profit for folks everywhere.
What are the failing schools in the district right now, and which ones are you concerned about?
Well, I'm concerned across the district. I mean, I have visited several schools recently. I think the last year I visited, for example, I think it was North Charleston High School. And seeing these kids, if they're not ready by middle school, they're not going to be ready for high school. And certainly if they're not ready for high school, they're not going to be ready for a job when they get out and graduate, or when they drop out at the age of 18. I mean, I dropped out of high school myself. And so, seeing those students who have real needs, we've got to really focus on our elementary children, elementary schools, and get them ready. But also by middle school, they've got to have those skills, reading and math, those basic skills, in order to be able to get jobs when they do graduate from high school. And the other thing that we need to do, I think, across the district would be vocational training. So a lot of times, students and parents don't realize the kind of opportunities there are for folks with CDL licenses, like truck drivers or plumbers or electricians. There's real opportunity for people that have skills. You don't need necessarily a 4-year college degree, or even 2-year. If you have specific job training in certain areas, you can make a great living. And take welding, for instance. If you have that kind of skill set, when you graduate from high school, you make $75,000 a year, Quintin, as a welder. And there are manufacturers here in the Lowcountry, in the 1st Congressional District, that don't have enough welders, and can't train them fast enough, where they're actually going out and training people to help them with this type of career, so that in the hopes that they will then become welders for their manufacturing company. And so there is real opportunity, and those are the kinds of things that I want to work on. But if you look at urban and rural areas, those are the areas that need the most help.
And let me get back to healthcare, because I want to know this. How many other healthcare regulations will you move to aside if you're elected to office?
Well, there's certainly a lot of regulations. There's too many to count. But for example, during COVID-19, the governor temporarily removed restrictions on something called their certificate of need that we have here in South Carolina. And in 2018, Secretary Azar put out what's called the Azar Report, encouraging states to repeal all or most of their certificate of need laws. And that's an effort that I worked on. It's regulations that get in the way of the healthcare market. So for instance, one of the regulations as part of the certificate of need, and there are about 23 of them, but limits the number of acute beds that are allowed at hospitals. But when COVID-19 happened, as you know, all these hospitals needed to make room and add more beds to their hospital systems to meet the needs of the numbers of people that were projected were going to get sick from COVID-19. Thank God that didn't happen. But in order to prepare for worst case scenario, they had to add to the number of beds in their hospitals. They weren't able to do that because of our certificate of needs laws. And so the governor actually temporarily lifted that law so that they could add more beds to their hospitals. The same thing with nursing homes. They have the same limited number of beds, as hospitals, but through the certificate of need laws. But that's an effort that I've been looking at and repealing. But at a broader, more international scale, if you look at what we have manufactured in China, 85% of our pharmaceuticals active ingredients are made there. And that's a problem right now. And if you look at our supply chain too, when things are not on the shelves in our grocery stores, if they're manufactured or made overseas in another country, we need to repeal many of our regulations in order to have more products made here, right here in the United States. And regulations have such a great cost. If you want to buy a piece of furniture, 25 cents on every dollar cost of that furniture goes to regulations, and which is why it's made cheaper in other countries that don't have those same burdensome regulations. I do support repealing, and a great rule of thumb that I have heard for every new regulation that is created, that the government then peel back 2 of them as a way to slowly and incrementally remove some of those burdensome regulations. But there are tens of thousands of them.
Turn to insurance. When it comes to insurance, how do you hope the open markets will be able to allow for insurance sales to take place, say, across state lines?
Right. Well, that's something. They have these pacts that can happen, in the state legislature. Healthcare really is really federal and state. A lot of that policy is made at both levels, and Obamacare being the federal level. But competition across state lines, if it were ever to be a possibility, I think is a great way to increase competition in the market. I talked to a business owner last summer that has a property insurance type of company, and he's got 20 employees. And in South Carolina, in the insurance market, he has three options. Really, he only has two options, because the third is it's not competition at all. Like, it's not even the same kind of plan. It's not even comparable. So he has effectively two options for healthcare for his employees. And of the 20 employees, he pays roughly 12 employees healthcare premiums every month, because he doesn't want them, his full-time employees, to have that burden. So he pays for that benefit for them. And last year, the insurance company he has increased their premiums for the employees by 67%. And so he went from paying $1,200 a month per employee for their healthcare premiums to $2,000 a month per person. And he's now paying over $20,000 a month for those healthcare premiums. And he's saying if he got another increase on that, he wouldn't be able to afford healthcare for his employees. And he doesn't want them to be burdened or have to have that bill, because it would be unaffordable for them. And when he was going through the process and looking at the insurance product in the market, the two options that he had, one insurance company A said, hey, we want to see the quote of your original insurance company provider, so then we can then quote you. And then he didn't want to do that, but was required to do that. And he shared that with him, and he got back basically the same quote. And so, hey, option A and option B are virtually the same price. There's no competition in that. And any way that we can have more insurance options in the market, the better off we are, whether that's across state lines or more insurance providers coming into a state or into a market. However we can make that happen, I fully support.
What should be the actual costs for these services?
The actual cost of your healthcare?
I mean, insurance, sorry.
Oh, of your insurance? I think that's going to be dependent upon your own health personally, and if you have a family, if you're providing for that family or not, or if you're an individual. I'm not an actuary, so I don't know how they do those algorithms or those calculations. I know that they're very complicated, but it's very expensive, and it's expensive because the government has such a huge role in it. If it were fully privatized and we're overregulated, I believe that all of us, you and I included, would have better access to healthcare. We would be provided better healthcare at a lower cost if we really had competition. I mean, look at when you go to the DMV. I mean, I don't think anybody wants their healthcare run by the DMV either.
And let me get back to, obviously.
You there?
Oh yes, ma'am. It's a little, I guess, this
Okay.
Wi-Fi. Yeah, sorry for that. But I know that.
Yeah, that's okay.
Oh, no worries. You also told Kelly this morning. You said this quote: "You obviously tried hard to unite the party while running in the primary." Who was Nancy Mace as a primary candidate?
Nancy Mace is Nancy Mace. I try to put everything out there that I can. I really ran to try to bring people together. I wanted to bring conservatives and traditional Republicans together, and that's where you saw us win without a runoff and win so overwhelmingly. That was a product of unifying people, unifying the Republican Party to come together. I believe that we lost this last time because we were very divided, and I'm working together really try and unite folks and have them come together. Republicans, independents, and maybe even a few Democrats with us.
And you talk about obviously bringing conservative and traditional Republicans together. What now should be the common ground?
Well, there are a lot of issues. I think, the economy, jobs in the economy is important. Even though I'm fiscally conservative, a lot of what I've done as a state lawmaker has been nonpartisan or bipartisan. Issues of how do we create more jobs in the economy that we have right now, healthcare. The other topic that people are conversing about right now is over George Floyd and criminal justice reform and prison reform. And these are all issues that I've actually worked on as a state lawmaker, as a Republican state lawmaker. These are issues that we've got to come together on and work on together. But conservation would be another one as well. I mean, down here in the Low Country, we love our beaches. We love our live oak trees. As you can see sitting right behind you, there is one. We want to protect our land. We don't want to be overdeveloped, and we certainly don't want offshore drilling either. And so there are just so many issues that I believe Republicans and Democrats can come together on and work on together. Those are the things that excite me. Those are the conversations that I want to have, is really find a way that find those issues where we can work together. I think it's one thing to have rhetoric and say things that sound good. It's another to actually do the work, because it's not easy. When I passed my prison reform bill, the inmate shackling bill,
Right.
I had a unanimous vote coming out of the House. I had every single Republican and Democrat in the room vote to send that bill to the governor's desk to be signed into law. And those are the kinds of things that I believe that people want their representative to actually do.
You also told Kelly in the interview this morning, you said people should be angry about George Floyd. How angry are you still 2 weeks after this particular deadly incident?
It's very upsetting. And, and there are still people that are protesting every day. And I have conversations with my children every day. They're very upset. They want to know why. They've seen videos on the internet because they're old enough now to be able to do that. But these are conversations. These are moments that we can teach our children, so that as they grow up with compassion. I think we need to have compassionate leadership when we're talking about these issues. I am not an African American male. I don't know what it's like to get pulled over a dozen times by the age of 21. Our U.S. Senator Tim Scott talks about what it's like to be a Black man in D.C., a U.S. senator, and being pulled over and having those issues. And so for me right now, I really want to listen to that community. I really want to listen to the challenges that they're facing. And when I do have conversations with those in the African American community, and they're open to telling me their stories, those are the things that I want to hear, so that we can find solutions. And I think it's federal, it's state, it's local, it's municipal, and it really is about us coming together and working on those issues. But I've worked on criminal justice reform. For example, again, my prison reform bill that was just signed into law, I am a Republican. And I think it's rare to find someone who is Republican who actually has tried to work on those types of issues, because I do think that they are important. Growing up here in the Low Country, I do know, because I've seen it growing up here, that the differences between rich and poor can literally be black and white. And that's why education is so important. I think that's a primary way that we can be helpful in those communities. It's one thing to have equality where everyone is treated the same way and equally, which I think most people strive to do. But then there's an equity component to it. There are some individuals that need to be provided with resources to have an equal start. And those things are important. And it's something that, as a lawmaker, it's not just necessarily inherent that you know this. Some of these things have to be learned. And you've got to listen to those communities and learn about those issues so that you can better prepare and better and help them.
What are the challenges you're listening to when it comes to the African American community?
Education's a big one. Education, especially our elementary schools, and getting their children the best education they can, so they can have the best opportunity. That's a big one. Obviously, race relations and equality is another. And I've talked a lot about those issues, and tried to listen to folks in the community. I believe in free speech, and I believe in everyone's right to protest. I do believe that the community out there at large should be angry about what happened to George Floyd. And now is the time to listen to those folks. I think it's really important to be able to do that.
And a lot of people are saying do not defund the police departments, but try to restructure them. How would you help restructure the police departments around the country if you're a congresswoman?
Well, I think that's, again, another issue that is not just a mandate at the federal level. I mean, that's really state and local and municipal. We've got to work together as a community to restructure. If there's a problem in that police department, there may be police departments that have a wonderful relationship with the African community and don't have problems there. And then there are going to be those that do. One of the things that I've worked on as a state lawmaker, and that I've worked on is a criminal system, basically database. After I was elected into office, I filed several bills when I was first elected into office, but one of the first bills that I filed was a criminal database. So in the state of South Carolina, if you're SLED or state trooper or a court system or juvenile system or maybe DNR or a municipal system or municipal court system, all this criminal data that we have is in separate sources. They're in separate databases and they don't talk to each other. And so if you really want to take a look at, statistically speaking, across the state of South Carolina, how African Americans may be disproportionately affected in their communities, we've got to be able to see that big picture. And I did it with the intent of looking at Mother Emanuel and Dylan Roof and what allowed him to be able to purchase a firearm when he shouldn't have been able to purchase a firearm because of the drug charge or conviction against him. But when the FBI was looking into his background, when he got the background check, that information was, one, not readily available, and two, was in different places and they didn't get a response in time. And so if we had had a database that in 30 seconds you could pull up that information on an individual, you could have a real and meaningful impact on the community. And I think the same thing would go for statistics that we could pull together on how African Americans are disproportionately affected in our criminal justice system as well.
And I know that you have to go right now because
I gotta go. I'm sorry.
But
Yeah.
how would you describe leadership with Nancy Mace in one word?
Nonpartisan and hardworking. It's hard to do it in one word. Hardworking. If I can hyphenate, say hardworking. I just I want people to know that I am fiscally conservative. I care about jobs in the economy, and I care about our community. And I've worked in a really nonpartisan way to try to get things done. And again, I'm going to go back to my bill that was signed into law by the governor. It's rare to find a Republican lawmaker who can lead on those types of issues, like prison reform, like criminal justice reform, like healthcare and education and those things. And that's important. And that's part of our conversation going forward for the November election. And I want to thank you, Quintin.
Yes.
I really want to thank you for the work that you do. You get out there, you ask good questions and tough questions of Republicans and Democrats alike. And so you're out there being nonpartisan yourself and fair. And I appreciate you. So thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for coming back on Quintin's Close-Ups, Nancy.
And I look forward to giving you a hug when I see you in person soon. So we'll get through this together, okay?
Yeah, deal.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you, Quintin.
You're welcome.